Scientific literature guides us along the path to efficiency across our lives. We all want more for less, and this research can help us achieve that. But it's really flawed, and quite largely due to our human involvement. So let's talk about some of the issues with it. To start off, we need to define good research so that we're able to separate it from the bad. So I need to lay the groundwork for some basic statistics that is going to underpin the entirety of our discussion. If you're familiar with the normal distribution and z-testing, jump to that timestamp there. The fundamental piece of statistics is something called the normal distribution, which you may know as the bell curve. Many things in nature, in fact almost everything in nature, is normally distributed, which allows us to measure how sure we are that an outlier result is misbehaving using the normal distribution. Okay, so why is this important for us? Well, let's say we flip a coin 100 times. On average, you should get 50 heads and 50 tails, but often there will be an imbalance. And the imbalance can be used to quantify how sure we are that a coin is behaving properly or is potentially rigged. And this sureness that we have is something we call our confidence level. You could do this test to see if a coin is biased. If you flipped a coin 100 times and 51 were heads and 49 were tails, you can be pretty comfortable that the coin is behaving at least pretty close to fairly, right? But if you got 90 heads and only 10 tails, you would be able to say that I am 95% sure that this coin is rigged in some way. It turns out that 95% is actually a very common number that people pick. But what does the 95% mean, and what's the other 5%? Well, it means that when we get a result, we can be 95% sure that our result is true. But it does mean that 5% of the time, 5 whole percent of the time, we will draw the wrong conclusion from the data. In the example of our coins, sometimes coins will just behave abnormally, even though they are fair coins. You could just flip a coin 100 times and get 100 heads and 0 tails. It would be very unlikely, but it would be possible. This means that 5% of the time, the results that we take from the data are wrong. And this is important, we'll come back to it later. In order to perform statistics properly, we decide on a confidence level, which is how sure we want to be that our result is an outlier before the experiment begins. We then design and do the experiment and compare the imbalance to our reference value that we look up in a textbook, which is dependent on our confidence level. We then publish our results whether or not we get a positive result, which is the result that you were testing for. If we reach significance, which means that the imbalance was greater than our reference value, we can say that the coin is manipulated with some amount of confidence. Due to a lot of really complicated maths, this just works for lots of very different things. And in fact, most tests that people do on statistics actually work pretty much based off the normal distribution or one of its siblings. And crucially for us, it applies to sports science literature. Statistics are misused and abused non-stop by researchers. A 2015 article found that 90% of all published research articles lack discussions about central assumptions, while many articles just flat out failed to discuss any of their statistical methodology. Optimistically, they got lazy and didn't feel like explaining all of their hard work. But more cynically, they could be hiding something that they don't want us to be able to check for ourselves. In fact, over a third of surveyed researchers admitted to questionable research practices. Admissions included data fiddling, dodgy interpretations of results, and more. A 2009 article surveyed scientists and found that 2% admitted having fabricated or falsified data outright. When asked about this behaviour as seen in their colleagues, nearly 15% said that they had seen their colleagues falsify or fabricate data. And the reasons they give for this is worse than anything you could imagine. Gut feeling, didn't agree with previous or expected results, pressures from a funding source all massively contributed to this behaviour. A more recent article published in 2018 found that research that had positive results were more likely to be published. In fact, almost twice as likely as negative results. Positive results are also cited 60% more than negative ones, according to a 2017 article. Okay, so what does this mean for us as science-based lifters? Well, it means that the articles you see will have a positivity bias. They are more likely to find significant results than they should, and you are much less likely to see equally valid but opposite findings. To put this in the perspective of our coin, people do tests at a 95% confidence level to see if it is biased or fair. For a fair coin, you'd expect 95% of the results to suggest that it's a fair coin, represented by our pink dots, and 5% to suggest that it is a biased coin, represented by our orange dots. However, just from the publishing bias, half of the pink dots won't be published. So only about 90% of the articles that you find published will suggest that the coin is fair. Negative results are also 2/3 as likely to be cited, so we lose even more of our pink dots due to them being cited less. This means that we've multiplied the presence of these positive results, these incorrect positive results, by 3, without even considering the effects of poor practice and falsified evidence. Okay, but why? Why did people do all this? Well, it turns out, as ever, money is the root of the problem. Fiscal incentives like grant money, more numerous citations from positive research, and readers wanting novel results all contribute. Researchers are heavily incentivized to publish, often only maintaining an income if they publish to a quota. The recent push for AI development has allowed low-quality, mass-produced hoax literature with no scientific value or credibility. Paper mills can use these AI to fabricate data and write fraudulent analyses of it. Some people even think that 1 in 50 papers published fit this pattern, which is over 10 times the amount it was in 2005. In all fairness though, what reader wants to sit down and read a study titled, "We found nothing"? Who wants to cite that paper? And most influentially, who's going to pay for it? Why not skip all the hassle and, to put it bluntly, make up a more interesting, more entertaining, highly publishable article that says whatever you want it to? If we stuck by this dogma throughout history, we'd still be stuck drilling holes in people's heads to relieve headaches, putting raw chicken on bubonic plague sores to cure them, and we would still believe that bad juju in the air caused sickness. Without negative results showing that these crazy treatments and beliefs were unhinged and unfounded in reality, we would still be in the Dark Ages. So yeah, negative results are crucial to science and should be published and taken seriously, even if it's not what you're hoping for. Let's talk about a very different flavour of issues with research. Sports science in particular is rife with statistical abuse. A 2020 article found that most research endeavours in sports science have very little collaboration with other fields, most relevantly statistics. This means that researchers are left to fend for themselves, designing and analysing experiments and their results. Nearly 95% of studies in this space have no co-author associated with statistics. These researchers often lack the resources and the capability to perform proper statistical analysis, so errors and questionable practices inevitably creep in. It is common for researchers to just plug their raw results into a computer program that recommends a series of different tests to them. One such questionable practice is the gender bias. Gabrielle Jackson wrote, "In medicine, man is the default." And this could not be more visible in sports science. written by men for men perfectly sums it up. And while this is great for me as a bloke, it leaves half the population wanting more. Less than a quarter of academic publications in sports science have a female first author. And while there has been a marked improvement over the past few years, it still isn't even near equity. Perhaps more relevant to us is that only a third of research participants were female, and nearly a third of studies were conducted with only male participants. This means that conclusions drawn are less applicable to women, with more specific, smaller research trials frequently foregoing women altogether. I was trying to find a paper examining differences in how men and women peak for powerlifting competitions, for example, and I didn't come across any studies that included women in any meaningful numbers. Most of them didn't at all. The only relevant information I could dig up was anecdotal with no statistical backing. I'm not saying that science is untrustworthy. You can trust science, but you cannot always trust scientists. With the way the field is set up, monetary incentives force researchers to produce lots of garbage. It is no longer enough to hear about a headline or just read the introduction to a study. You have to dig into the meaty parts of the research. And that requires specialist knowledge and training. Fuck me, it's hard enough for me to read any of this stuff, and I'm going to be writing some stuff for it next year. Beyond that, it is so expensive to access these articles. I'm lucky to have a subscription associated with my university, but for anyone else, Nature alone is 180 quid a year. PubMed and Sport Archive make it possible to read some research, but often the best stuff is locked behind a paywall. And the only way that we'll ever see change is if a multi-billion-dollar industry fundamentally pivots, and we all know that's not happening. However, there are lots of pro-information, open access platforms if you want to read some literature. The Open Access Network has a list of great sites where you can find research papers and dig into the science, so give them a look if you're interested. Supporting these journals that work on different models is critical to making research more accessible and more reliable. Bit miserable, isn't it? Well, that's the modern world for you, eh? Go watch a happier video of mine where I lift weights with Rachel, who kindly helped me edit the script for this video. Also, you will have noticed that across the video, in the bottom right corner or top right corner, there will have been little numbers in square brackets. These are all citations to different sources that I use, so you can go and have a look and read them for yourself down below. They should all be in the description, assuming that YouTube lets me put them there.